I always think about, if I look out 20 years, 30 years from today, am I on the path to be in a state of regret? And if I am, I know I got to do something else. And so I think that for me, giving up means that, hey, I will live with no regrets. When I die, I laid it all out on the field.
Financial independence,
freedom,
financial picture,
independent financially,
financial future,
financial freedom and wealth,
financial independence.
Get your fill, financial independence and long life. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Get Your Fill, Financial Independence and Long Life, where we explore ways to achieve those two goals. And people come on to help us who are really cool. And that's why I'm very excited. We have Akeem Shannon with us today. He has had more than his fair share of failures, fall downs, setbacks, and hurdles. Hey, we can relate to that, right? But through failing repeatedly, he found himself inching his way towards success, right? Fall forward, that's what we say. From college dropout to CEO of an Inc. magazine top 50 fastest growing consumer brands, Akeem has shared his story on stages such as Shark Tank and the Today Show, all the way to the walls of the Smithsonian National Museum. Awesome. Akeem, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Christine. I'm excited for our conversation.
Me too. What we were talking about just before we started the recording is when you're making that leap, right? It's hard to fail forward. Let's just say this. It's hard to fail forward or even to let yourself go when you have people relying on you. And I think that's something that keeps people a little bit stuck in their 9-to-5 world. And I don't know if that was your situation, but I know we were talking about the idea of the things that you tell yourself. And you hear people all the time, the way they talk to themselves, like, oh, this can't work. I don't have what it takes or whatever, right? How did you change your narrative to get from being, what you consider not your ultimate self to being to where I think anybody would agree that you're really successful?
Yeah, for me, I've been in sales for maybe about 7 years. After flunking out of college, losing my scholarship, and really kind of working my way up in the corporate world. And I've become pretty successful. I was making good money. I was working at a tech startup, great benefits, and it was very comfortable, or at least it should have been. Right? It should have been very comfortable. But I was working at the time with entrepreneurs every day. It was a fintech company. And I was meeting all these entrepreneurs and seeing all the types of businesses they have. And because we're in fintech, I was seeing how much money they were all making. And, I'm hearing their stories of, I quit my job 7 years ago and started this coffee shop. Now we have 3 locations. And, you just hear all these great stories. And that feeling in the back of my head was just like, if I'm doing in 20 years what I'm doing today, I'll be filled with regret. That's how I felt. And I just felt like every day was going through the motions. I like to say it, I felt like I was moving through life sedated, where it just the same, working for the weekend type of energy. And when I realized that about myself, even though like on paper, here you have a kid with, just the high school diploma making 6 figures a year, great job, only person in my role without a college degree. Like I should be happy and content with that. But I just knew it wasn't what was meant for my ultimate purpose. And so I made a really tough decision that I just got to go do my own thing. Now, luckily at the time, I had some money saved up. And so I knew that I could survive with just my savings for 2 years, not making any money, to survive for 2 years. And so for me, that was enough to say, all right, I'm going to go for it and do it. And honestly, when I first left, I didn't even have the idea for Flipsitk, the company that we ultimately built. And I was doing marketing at the time and then realized I didn't like that either. But I just went out on faith, and I was very fortunate. I had a boss at the time who gave me this book called The Alchemist. Now, even though he gave me this book, it was like, Akeem, I think if you read this book, you're going to find your purpose. And I know this is what you need. So you don't go out and just don't do anything. I didn't read the book though, Christine. He gave me this book. He's like, you should read it. I'm like, yes, I'm going to read it. Didn't read it. But I kept hearing about the book. I would hear about it on TV. I would see it online. My mom sent me a YouTube video with Oprah interviewing Pharrell. And she's like, Pharrell, what's the best book you've ever read that changed your life? He's like, oh, The Alchemist. Still would not read this book. And then I ended up moving to a new apartment. And even though my boss would give me this beautiful hardback copy of the book with illustrations, it's very nice collector's edition. Um, I see this book on my counter in this new apartment, boxes everywhere, just moved in, and it's a paperback, tattered $2.99 discount copy of a book, and it just so happens to be The Alchemist. And I
You really had to
freaked
get hit on the
out.
head with this thing, huh?
Absolutely, it hit me on the head, and I freaked out because I'm like, where'd this book come from? Have I always owned this book and just never realized I owned the book? Like I was really kind of scared. And so I ended up reading it cover to cover that day. And it was about this boy who goes on a journey to find his treasure, his dream. And he learns very early on that he has to follow omens or signs from the universe to find this treasure. And immediately I'm like, oh, this book was the omen. I just wasn't paying attention to it. But when I read that and just saw how if your eyes are open to what your heart desires, you'll see the opportunity where it lies. And I think, we've all had those moments where we had an idea and then a few years later we see it on TV and it's like, oh, that was that was my idea. And I think that for each and every person, we all have, ideas and things that we think about that could become products or services, businesses, entertainment properties that we just don't pursue because we don't think it's possible for us. Even though we get the idea, we see the opportunity and we ignore it. And
Yeah.
so for me, what happened right after I read this book was I got a phone call from my uncle, who's an engineer at NASA, and he told me about this project he was working on for the Space Launch System. This little wiring that he was going to put behind paneling, and he was going to use this adhesive that NASA had invented in the 70s that was like reusable, washable, is based off the feet of geckos. And since I
Cool.
had just moved and I had recently mounted my TV on the wall, and it took me like 2 weeks to figure out how to do that, I was just thinking, like, man, a magic NASA adhesive would make sticking that TV on the wall so much easier. And while we never stuck a TV on the wall, we did figure out how to do a
Probably a
tiny
good
TV.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. Probably a good thing. I don't think the paint would have held. But we did figure out how to do a tiny TV, a cell phone. And that's where the idea for our product Flipsitk was born. A little device that lets you mount your phone any flat surface. But it
Cool.
really came from the mindset of, hey, my dreams and opportunities and what I'm looking for in life is right in front of me if I only pay attention and listen.
That's it. Yep. The diamonds, yeah, right? Oh, it's diamonds in, it's not diamonds in your backyard, but you know what I'm talking about.
Diamonds in the rough.
That, no, it's, well, anyway, it's a whole book about a guy who goes through the whole, um, and you'd know it if I said it. It's a famous guy, wrote the book, and he goes all over the country looking for diamonds. And then when he comes home, the person he sold his place to is rich because they found diamonds in the backyard.
In
So
his backyard.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly this. Yep, that's it. And it's so true. I think sometimes we go out in search of something and not realizing that the treasure that we were looking for was inside of us the whole time.
That's it. That's it.
And
Exactly.
to me, that's really what entrepreneurship is all about. And so, today I get to go around the country and I do a lot of speaking engagements and I speak about the power of storytelling. We use storytelling to grow and scale our business Flipsitk. I use storytelling to get those jobs that I wasn't qualified for. Like it was really all about the stories that I told. And what always usually pushed me forward and kept me going was the stories that I would tell myself
Well,
about what I.
that's it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's what like I said, you hear people the way they speak to themselves, and you think, oh my God, if someone's talked to me that way, I'd be offended. I'd be slapping them upside the head. I would never take that from someone else, but you take it from yourself. And
And I think I was watching something or reading something, and they were talking about like the possibility of future outcomes. And they were like, in our minds, we think of a negative, and to us, it feels very likely. And something impossible, just amazing dream, winning the lottery seems very impossible. And it's like the truth is that in your mind, these things have equal possibility of coming true. So it's like,
right,
why not make the one that would be incredible the likely scenario and the one that will be terrible to be the unlikely scenario. And when you do that in your mind, all of a sudden, the things that you see, the phone calls you make, the people you talk to, the people you meet, it all changes. And you start to attract the opportunities that bring you closer to that dreamlike state. And hopefully we can get into some of the crazy, things I got into building my entrepreneurship journey, because there was just times where I just told myself, hey, I'm going to make something impossible happen. And then sometimes it would happen. And it's been pretty crazy.
It's amazing. I mean, anyone, I think, looking at you, and the idea that you had and the way it just all sort of came together would say that that's definitely you're following the path, you're getting the inspiration, you're listening to it. But were you always that way? Was there
You
ever a
know,
time when you told yourself bad stories?
oh yeah, plenty. Yes, I still do today. I gotta correct myself sometimes. I think we all do. You know, what really helped me transition into that type of mindset, when I was, I went away to college. I got this full ride scholarship to study chemical engineering at Howard University in DC, and I end up losing this scholarship. And I spent an entire semester basically locked in my dorm room. My parents didn't know I had lost my scholarship. I wasn't going to class. I was like in a very deep depression. I didn't even know at the time. I'm just like trying to avoid the reality of what I have to face, this big
Yeah.
failure. But it was just, I would stay up all night. I would sleep all day. It was really, really just a very low place to be in. And when I came home, I made myself this promise that by the time my friends graduate college, I wanted to be making at least as much as the average college graduate. And so over the course of the next few years, I do this. I end up working at a couple Fortune 500 companies. I save up nearly $100,000. And I remember I was on stage at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, one of the best hotels in Miami Beach. And I was there for this contest called Verizon Rockstar. I was working for Verizon at the time. And I end up winning this contest. It's basically a pitch competition for Verizon salespeople. And I got to introduce this famous band, and they gave me a signed guitar. It was this incredible experience. And in that moment, I just realized the transformation that happened from just the doom and gloom that I was facing a few years prior to this absolutely like triumphant moment, like on top of the world, really feeling truly like invincible. Um, and to me, it just showed me like no matter how bad it seems like, and when I was, 18 years old in college, and like I felt like this is the end, right? I'm dropping out of school. I'm a college dropout now. It's my life's over. I'm gonna be working, a Radio Shack for the rest of my life. It just felt like it was the end. And for me to witness, it's never the end. Failure is simply a feature of success. It's not an outcome unless you allow it to be. And when that witnessing that for me, it kind of just triggered something in my mind. And so all of a sudden, when I would be facing things that were incredibly dire, or when things didn't work out, opportunities didn't come together, all of a sudden I could always go back to that lived experience and say, hey, even when you think it's the absolute end, when it's not going to work out, when it's all bad, you never know what it's actually leading to, as much as you may try to avoid it. And I often think about, man, what would it be like if I had stayed in school and been a chemical engineer? I have a lot of friends who are chemical engineers. Their jobs seem incredibly boring to me. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if I would enjoy figuring out how to make a Cheez-It from 100 calories to 95 calories. Like that is not my idea of a fun time. So, I'm really grateful now for the hardship that was faced, being able to see what happened on the other side of it. And I think for me, that helps me to correct those really like negative mindsets and say, hey, something big can happen. So that for me happened during that period. And then I've been able to reinforce that belief just again and again and again throughout my life. And I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. But was there a sort of a landmark moment or something that important that happened that sort of got you from that place where you're sleeping all day to being like, damn it, I'm gonna make this thing. I'm gonna be better, at least as good as everybody who's graduating. I'm gonna do this thing, and I'm gonna, to fire you up, because it seemed like that's a big chasm to, it's a big leap.
So I don't know if it was a single moment, but I'll tell you the chain of events that happened. I spent the whole semester depressed, right? And then finally I had to tell my parents because it was Christmas and I had to go home and I couldn't come back. So I called them. I was sobbing and crying, and they were really nice on the phone. Oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. But trust me, when I got home, they were pissed.
They just want to make
But
sure you actually came home and didn't like hit the road,
yeah,
right?
exactly. They wanted to make sure I came home. That's all they were trying to do. And when I came home, it was just I just felt even worse. And I remember my buddies from high school were texting me and like, "Hey, Akeem, we should get together over Christmas, blah blah." And I did not want to see any of them. And I think for me, that was the thing where it's like I just felt paralyzed where I couldn't tell anyone where I was in life. And so I was just committed to getting to a point where I could because I didn't tell any friends, I didn't tell any family. I would not talk to anybody about what was going on. And since I didn't want to talk to them about what was going on, I just didn't talk to them at all.
Yeah.
And so I was just so determined to get to a point where I could have that conversation again. And for me, I couldn't have that conversation in the place that I was at.
Yeah.
Uh, so I had to get to a better place.
Do you feel like you kind of hit your personal bottom and you're like, okay, here's some solid footing. I'm
You
gonna
know,
leap off from here.
I did. I started working. I was only making $10 an hour when I first started. And I was good at sales. So I was getting accolades at work. And these people who I was working with, they didn't know anything about that big failure. So to them, they see
Right.
this young kid come in and I'm a great salesperson. And so they're like, wow, you're really great. And so that started to build my confidence up. And I think I had owed my school like a few $1,000s for the dorm. And so I remember my parents were like, you got to pay that off. So I ended up paying that off. And then I saved up maybe another $5,000 and I bought my first car. And for me, it was a little 2001 Mazda Miata with about 130,000 miles on it.
No, that's a hot car. The Miatas are adorable. I love those
A
cars.
great car. And I could drop the top on it. And I just, buying that car for me was like, it was huge because before that, I was taking the bus to work. It took me an hour each way. It was a nightmare. I absolutely hated it. And that was probably another driver that I'm just like, I got to do this because this sucks. This all sucks. But I think when you're at that state, like if you want to get out of it, you just do everything you can to get out that state. And I did not want to be in that position for long. So
Yeah.
it probably took me about 6 months to go from coming home to then buying that car. And that once I was able to do that, that's when I started to be like, okay, I can really make this happen. I can do this.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely it kept building up. And then I got another job and I started making a lot more money. And then I got my own apartment. And I just started to really build momentum.
Well, and that's it. I mean, that people say, how do you build self-confidence? You make a goal and you achieve it. You make a goal and you achieve it. And the more you
Yep.
can do that, the more you feel like you can make goals and achieve them. And then you can just make your goals bigger and brighter and more exciting. And
And I think what's so important about that too, Christine, is that everyone's like, well, what's the next? People always ask me, what
what's
step should I take?
next?
What should I? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Just take the step.
Yeah.
If you take a step and you land it, you'll take another. But if you constantly think about all the steps it's going to take to get you where you want to go, you're going to give up before you even get started because you're looking at the top of a Mount Everest and saying, how am I going to get up there
Yeah.
versus just starting to walk.
Right.
So I think that's just critical.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Analysis paralysis. You're like, well, should I bring the blue shoes or the red shoes to Mount Everest? Like, who
Yeah.
gives a crap? Put the friggin' shoes on. Let's
Shoot
go, right?
over, man. Yeah.
It has to be perfect, but it's not going to be perfect. And you're going to rewrite that whole story before you even ever get to Nepal. So,
It's never gonna go the way you think it's gonna go.
yeah,
You just gotta go anyway, knowing that that's how it's gonna be.
yeah. So, is there anything? I mean, you've accomplished a lot, obviously, throughout your life. Is there anything that you feel like is the most exciting or the thing that's got you feeling the most proud? Or, I mean, what is there something that stands out in your past first?
Yeah. So there's a lot of moments for me. You mentioned earlier when on Shark Tank, that was a huge moment for me. The Smithsonian Museum is a huge moment for me. Getting into retail store, the first time I walked into a Target and I saw the product that I had come up with on the shelf. Oh my gosh, it was
Yeah.
like it was just so incredible. It's just almost unbelievable. I remember I remember I was out of town and I didn't bring any Flipsticks with me. And I was like, oh, I can go into a Target and buy one. And I just went to a random Target and I was able to buy it. And it was just like, I was like, man, I just looked at myself and I turned to the person that worked there. I was like, "You see this thing?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah." He's like, "Yeah, we got those a few months ago." I was like, "I made this." He's like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I made this." He's like, "I've never met someone that made something that was selling our store before."
Probably don't meet a lot of those people in Target.
And it was just for me, it was just so awesome. And I think, there's been a lot of great moments for me. Like I ended up buying my dream car a few years ago, like a Corvette. And it's so funny enough, it was the same exact color as the Miata that I had. So I was like, wait a minute, I had a silver convertible back then, and I have a silver convertible now. Very different cars. But it was just, a total, transformation, just seeing the growth that happened. But one that was really big for me, is I got contacted by the Smithsonian a few years ago, and they said they were putting together this exhibit on the history of cell phones, and they wanted to include me, which I thought was crazy. I thought it was a scam, honestly. I was like, that can't be right. And so fast forward a few years later, when it finally was getting ready to the exhibit was getting ready to launch, they invited me and my family up to DC, and we go to this, opening gala for this exhibit. And, to the left of me was this woman who had invented text messages. Okay. And to the right of me was the president and CEO of Qualcomm, the largest chip manufacturer in the world. And then there's me. I'm just like, wait a minute. I think you guys have me in the wrong exhibit. And I talked to the curator, about is why am I here? Because this is, there's some heavy hitters in this room. And he just told me that, look, we have kids, several millions and millions of kids that come to these museums every year, and they come to these exhibits. And he's like, if we only have, the creator of text messages and the CEO of a multi-billion dollar company in the exhibit, well, what does that tell a kid of what they can do and how they can be a part of history? And he's like, our job here is to show each and every person that comes through the door that you can be part of history too. And the fact that here I was back in this city, the same city where I had the biggest failure of my life, right? Washington, D.C. I actually gone to campus the day before the gala, walked through campus and just being like, man, I spent some good times here, but some sad times here. And to be back, and I remember my mom, who had pestered me for years about going back to school, brought her to the gala. And, she's talking to everybody. I'm like, Mom, you can't just be talking to people like this. He's just talking to everyone. She's so happy. And it was just like, I turned to her, I was like, man, Mom, you think I should still go back to college? Because it was just such a 360-degree turnaround. And it was just another one of those moments in my life where it's like, man, you just never know what life has in store for you. And when you can, if that failure never happened, I never would have been in the Smithsonian. I can guarantee you telling that.
Yeah.
Uh, and so for me, I've had a lot of incredible moments, on the set of Shark Tank. There's a crazy story of ups and downs of not making it on the Shark Tank, which I could definitely get into, but just the doors opening to that set, as much as I was almost having a heart attack, when it was happening. Uh, it was also just like, wow, you know, here's a show I watched as a kid, and I never would have imagined I'd be here, but here I am. The music's playing, and it's just surreal. And I think that I have a lot more of those moments. But I also know, and I think this is important for people, all along this journey, it's highs and lows. It's
Oh,
never
yeah.
like, oh, it's just peak, 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 peak.
Right.
No, there's peaks and then there's really low lows. And it's constant flow up and down. And so I think that having that happen to me earlier in life conditioned me to understand that this is how life goes. It's about seasons. You're going to have seasons of abundance where you're just killing it. And right after that, you're going to have seasons of winter where nothing grows, nothing's happening, nothing's working out for you. And that's okay because that's life. And every successful person you see, they have that in their life. We just don't talk about it. The media doesn't talk about that. They just want to tell you about all the great, shiny, amazing things that's happening. But the truth is that throughout their lives, they're always having those moments.
Of course. And that's why they're so precious. That's why they're so exciting, right? If you did was go from one, one Shark Tank like show to the next, it'd be like, oh my God, when did I get to go get a burger and relax, right? I mean, you need to have like need to have the lows to really appreciate the highs. And
Man, it makes you so much more grateful. And I think that when you talk about pulling yourself out of, really just kind of kicking that gear, that moment, to me, gratitude is always an emotion that I turn to that really helps me to reset. Because when you look back on where you've come from, no matter how little you have, you still got a lot. Like it's especially if you're listening to this in English, like you got a lot. Trust and believe, because there is a lot tougher lives out there.
that's for
And so I
sure.
think that when you have that gratitude and you just look back, it just makes you, it changes your emotion. You can't have fear and anger and depression while also having gratitude. And I think the ability to be able to replace those emotions, in your heart, it can open you up to more opportunities. And I know we've got very philosophical here,
Yeah, it's
on
good.
the entrepreneurship podcast, but I think to me, a lot of people talk about the practical and the strategic aspects of entrepreneurship, which are many and are important. But as much as entrepreneurship is a strategic practice, it's also a spiritual practice because it's a lonely road. It's ups and downs. You're with yourself. And so you really have to hone that that being okay with like yourself in order to make any of those other things happen.
Well, and like you were saying before, the story you tell yourself, it has to be a story of success. It can't be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna just knock on another door and get another no, right? You gotta believe like that next person is gonna be the one that's gonna, right? That's gonna turn the whole thing around. I'm gonna knock on this door and this person's gonna say, yes, I want to buy $1 million worth of life insurance, or I mean, whatever your gig is,
Absolutely.
right? You've got to keep that attitude, or else you just kill yourself after the first day. I mean, you
You'll
can't
be done.
maintain it.
You'll
You've
give
got to
up.
have a positive outlook and that confidence and the faith that something is going to work and that it's all for the better. This is all happening for
Absolutely.
my good, right?
It's
What if
all happening.
everything was happening for you, not to you, right?
That's it. Everything's happening for you. And just to tell you another story. When things don't work out, we always go to, oh well, it's the end, it didn't work, failure, blah blah blah. But a lot of times you don't realize, like you said, it's happening for you. So we start Flipsitk, and we went to a mall kiosk and we made some good money. We made like 30 grand in 2 months at a mall kiosk selling our Flipsitk. And so I end up applying for Shark Tank because I'm like, okay, I can get on this show. And 40,000 people apply for Shark Tank every year. Only 120 people get on Shark Tank every year. And so I get past 40,000 people to the final 250 and I get cut. And they say, sorry, you're not going to be on Shark Tank. And I was devastated. I just felt like I put all my eggs in one basket. My online shop wasn't working, and this was going to be the path for me. But instead of giving up, I said, okay, if I can't get us that celebrity to come on board, I'll find another. And I just start going to all these events. I found out about a celebrity football game at the Super Bowl, went to that event, ended up going to the BET Awards in LA, and we're just going to all these events. Just who am I going to meet? Just never know. And ultimately, I ended up finding about this huge event called the Revolt Summit, which was a music conference. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to this music conference. They have a pitch competition. I'll pitch. There'll be celebrities there. I'll win the pitch competition. I'll meet a celebrity. I'll get an investment. Somehow it'll work out. Well, it turns out after Akeem bought a VIP ticket and a plane ticket and a hotel and all that stuff, turns out the pitch competition was already closed and I wasn't going to be able to pitch. So instead, since it was a music conference, they had a music competition to win a record deal. And I'm just like, well, I'm going to enter the music competition
Cool.
and I am going to write a rap about my business Flipsitk and pitch the business in a rap and win the record deal and then use the money to invest it.
I love it.
Just absolutely absurd. And so
No,
I go,
it's awesome. It's not absurd. It's awesome.
right. Yeah. It was awesome to me, but I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want anyone else to give me their opinions because they probably be like, I don't know about that one, Akeem. Um, so I go I almost didn't even get to audition because I had to submit a last minute video, and I got that in, and then I end up being able to audition, and somehow I get to the top 5, which means I'm going to be able to get on stage live in front of DJ Khaled and Timberland and all these big, huge names in hip hop. And then the judges come to me and they say, "Oh, Akeem, you were in the top 5, but we had to disqualify you because we realized you're not a real rapper. You're trying to pitch your business." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "What difference does it make?" I was like, "The judges gave me the top marks. I should be in the top 5." They're like, "Nope, nope, can't be in the top 5." And I get disqualified. And I'm like, I've already, this is already the backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan. And now this isn't working. But at that time in my life, I was just so determined. My mindset was so strong. I was like, I am meant to be here. No matter how much friction or contrast comes in my way, like, I'm going to make this happen. It's meant for me. And so right before the final music competition was a comedy show. And so I'm sitting front row, and the comedian's on stage, and I just decide in the middle of his set, I just stand up and hold my product up in the air. And he looks at me and he was not happy. And I won't use the same language he used, but he's basically like, "Bro, what are you trying to sell me, man? You interrupted my show. What are you trying to sell?" And I just go into full pitch mode. I tell him about the Flipsitk, where he can stick it. It can let him make TikTok videos. He can stick it to the back of the seat of the plane to watch videos. And he starts cracking jokes about all the places he'd like to stick it. And they were very inappropriate places. And the crowd is eating it up. The whole show ends up getting derailed. And ultimately, he lets me on stage during his set to perform my rap. And I do the rap. The crowd is just laughing. And they're just like, "What is going on? This show is just totally derailed." And the same person that disqualified me from the competition ends up inviting me backstage. I end up meeting the organizers. AT&T was a sponsor of the event. I end up meeting all the executives. They end up flying me out to LA for their next event. They bought hundreds of Flipsticks to give away at their next event with their logo on it. And in LA, I end up meeting Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg ends up loving the Flipstikk. That's a whole nother story to itself. And ultimately, through this crazy series of events, one of the judges of the pitch competition that I never pitched for, he was a casting director for Shark Tank. And he's just hearing behind the scenes of this guy who was doing all this crazy stuff. He's on stage with the comedians. Snoop Dogg ends up loving the Flipstikk. And he ends up reaching out to me and asking me to come audition to be on Shark Tank.
Awesome.
And the difference between the first time I applied and the second time, the product was the same. The sales were the same, maybe even a little worse. But the difference now was the story was totally different. Now there's this incredible story of this person who didn't make it on the show that then went through all of these hoops and met all of these people to ultimately come back. And I wrote myself a different story, but it also meant that a different story could be told. And now when I go around the country and I speak at different events and conferences, like, I get to tell that story. And I just think, like, man, if I'd have made it on Shark Tank the first time, I wouldn't have incredible boring, boring. And so as much as that heartache hurt in the moment, man, it made for an unbelievable story. And so, you think sometimes that when you hit a wall and something doesn't work out, oh, this is just so unfair. Why me? But sometimes it's really for you and you just don't know in the moment.
Yeah, and now it's definitely right that you never could have architected that for yourself and said, "Okay, well, I'm gonna lose this, and I'm gonna do this, and this is gonna happen." Right? It's like,
Yeah,
come
right.
on.
I wrote that all out.
Right, exactly. It's like, that expression, "Man plans, God laughs." It's kind of like that.
Absolutely. That is so true. It's so true.
So when you're speaking to people now, what kinds of things are you impressing on them? What kind of things are you telling
Yeah.
audiences when you're speaking?
Yeah, what I learned from that whole journey of coming back to Shark Tank and be able to get on the show was that the story you tell matters. Like, the story matters almost more than anything else. And I think that's because as human beings, we have, 10,000 years of oral tradition where all we did was tell each other stories.
Yeah.
And so that is really like the most powerful way to communicate to another person. And at the end of the day, all decisions are just made by another person. And so, when we were able to get on Shark Tank through the power of a great story, I took that and realized that when we got into Target, it was a great story, but it wasn't mine. It was the story of our customers.
Right.
And when we started to hire people and I needed really senior level people to come work for a little startup, I had to tell them a great story about what we were building. And when we had to raise money from investors, I had to tell investors a great story about what we were capable of. And and so I really started to hone this ability that sales, the most powerful way to sell something is to a story. And sales isn't just, exchanging goods and services for money. No, sales is to convince someone to the merits of whatever it is you're doing. And so when I go around the country, I really like to teach people about here's how you build a better story. I call myself a story architect, and I like to build people into what I call story sharks, where you can just have any audience and you can go to them and you can tell them a story that's going to, at the very least, encourage them to give you more time, more of their time to learn more about your mission. And so we do that with four different categories. We talk about three stories, four mindsets, five principles, and six audiences. And all these, we call it 3456 because it's easy. So through these different elements, you can build a story about a nonprofit organization, about a startup. You can even build a story about your role within a larger organization. One of the audiences that we talk about are decision makers. And that's really like, hey, sometimes you're organization within an organization, but you still have a story to tell. How do you convince your manager or your boss to give you a promotion? How do you convince your manager or boss to increase the budget to fund a project that you want to work on? It's all about the stories that we tell. We talked about the story we tell ourselves. That's what all those four mindsets are about. Gratitude is a big one in there. Being able to reset is a big one in there. And so I really realized, for me, I realized that the success we had, the Flipsitk, I was not good at a lot of stuff, but I was always very good at storytelling. And that's what allowed us to grow. And so I get to go and teach people across so many very, industries, how they can use storytelling to scale and grow their organization.
Awesome. Awesome. And I can tell you're a great storyteller and a great salesperson. That's obvious.
Look, I got a lot of stories.
At such a young age. Come on.
I got a lot of stories.
Yeah. Awesome. Is that somewhere that like I could watch it? Is that been recorded somewhere that might be
So
on YouTube or something?
we do have some on YouTube. A lot of them, because they're at big conferences, they're proprietary, so we don't share a lot. We don't share most of those. But I recently just did one in partnership with the St. Louis City and St. Louis County Public Library System. They had a big entrepreneurship conference just this week, actually. So I kicked that off for them. That one is a little bit less about storytelling. That's what I call becoming invincible, which is mostly about the mindsets that are there. And sometimes, you may not be able to convince yourself that you're invincible, but you can convince yourself you're becoming invincible, or you're becoming an entrepreneur, or you're becoming successful, or you're becoming an athlete, or you're becoming whatever it is you're trying to do. It's a lot
Yeah.
easier to make that mental jump.
Yeah.
And that one actually is publicly accessible. So I'll make sure to send you that link and you can include that in the show notes. And that one, we do dive into storytelling as well as a part of that, but it goes through a lot of those uh, moments in my life where I felt invincible and then immediately after realized, no, I'm not.
Hey, but you don't have to be invincible. You just have to be on the right track and having a good time. And that's
Yep.
what it's all about, right?
And that's why I say I may not be invincible, but I am becoming invincible.
Invincible. Awesome. That story, I remembered the name of it. It's Acres of Diamonds by Russell Conwell. It's a
Acres. Okay, I'm gonna check that out because that
Acres of
sounds right.
Diamonds. Yeah, it's I basically I gave away the ending, but it's still worth reading it. It's a pretty good. It's a classic parable, similar actually to The Alchemist. So
Alchemy.
you,
Yep.
you might enjoy it. Don't let 75 people hit you on the head with it before you read it. It's a quick read.
Right.
It's a quick read. You can find it online. But anyway, I have loved talking to you, Akeem. I really have. You're awesome. You're great energy, and you're a lot of fun, and you're smart and cool and successful. And but is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about? Anything? I mean, we didn't even touch on your book, which you can also, quickly tell us about. But anything you wish I would have asked you, or anything you want to make sure people take away from this conversation?
Honestly, I think we really hit the vast majority of it. I would say just for anyone out there, whether you're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur today, you're a successful entrepreneur. Uh, Really the key for me is look, never give up. And sometimes you have to pivot. Sometimes you have to close one business and start another. But to me, when I think of giving up and not giving up, is like, don't just call it quits and say, hey, I can't achieve my dreams. I constantly think about this moment, and we didn't even get into this mental health side of things, but this moment that I had where I first experienced true paralyzing like anxiety, where I was watching this Liam Neeson movie and he was talking about when you die, it's not your life that flashes before your eyes, but it's the remembering of all the regrets that you have. I always think about, if I look out 20 years, 30 years from today, am I on the path to be in a state of regret? And if I am, I know I got to do something else. And so I think that for me, giving up means that, hey, I will live with no regrets. When I die, I laid it all out on the field. And so I think that for me, that means chasing your dreams, even when they change and it doesn't go the way you think, still going for it with everything you got. Because even if you don't get to exactly where you want it to be, trust me, the journey along was worth everything. And
Right.
as you talked about with Field of Diamond, with what's it called? The Diamond Book?
What's that?
The name of
Acres
the
of
book is
Diamonds? Oh, yeah, Acres of
Acres of
Diamonds.
Diamond.
Yeah.
What you end up finding is the whole purpose all along was to go through the journey, and then you end up getting the treasure then anyway. And it was not the way that you thought it was going to be, but without the journey, it wouldn't have even been worth it. You wouldn't have been able to appreciate it. And so I think that if just not giving up and continuing to push through is the key, not just to success, which it is, but it's also just the key to a fulfilling life. Like I would not trade in all the failures in the world that I've had, because it's allowed me to just have incredible experiences
Yeah.
along the way. So I think that's the biggest thing. And as far as the book goes, a lot of those stories are in the book. It's not out quite yet, but
But
I
you'll
will
send me a
definitely
link when it is, and I'll
I'll
update the show
definitely
notes.
send you the link and you can update the show notes when it's out. But
Awesome.
it's really going to be about that 3456 framework of storytelling, while also, of course, sprinkling in all the crazy stories that I've had, along the way.
So I do have one more question for you, because
Yeah.
I can sort of sense your personality in some ways like mine. Are you satisfied where you are, or are you thinking
Oh,
about
dude,
like what,
dude, that's
okay,
what.
this is all fine. What's next? What am I going to do next? Do you have like is that coming into focus? Do you know what your
Yeah.
next big step is?
You know, I'm doing it now. As I started building Flipsitk, people would sometimes ask me to come and talk to people and speak to people. And I realized, like, man, I love talking to people. It fills me up. It just motivates me. I love helping people build their own stories, but I just love getting people excited about life and excited about their own journeys. And so there's this, I listen to a lot of motivational speakers, and from old guys like Jim Rohn from back in the day to newer
Yeah.
people. And there's this guy, Les Brown, who was a huge speaker in like the 90s.
He's
Uh,
still
and
around. Les is still
oh, he's
around.
still around, but he was in
Don't write
like,
him off yet.
Madison Square Garden,
Right?
as a
Yeah.
motivational speaker. And obviously you have people like Tony Robbins, still selling out Madison Square Garden. And I think that's what's next for me. Like, I would like to do this on a scale that is just monumental, because I think there's so much lost potential in the world where people have given up. And, I think someone said once, like the wealthiest place in America is the graveyard or something like that, right? Whereas like there's so many people have taken their dreams and ideas and passions to the grave and never pursued them. And for me, I just want to see more people, as many as possible, pursue those things, because it's worth it. And most importantly, it's possible. It's totally possible and achievable. It's not easy, but it's possible. and it's definitely worth it. So I think for me, like becoming a huge motivational and public speaker, that for me is the next journey.
That seems like it's definite. That seems like a foregone conclusion to me.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I just need like maybe 50 million more people to also say the same thing.
So Akeem, do you know Les? Have you met Les?
Say it again.
Have you met Les
No,
Brown?
I have not. I have not.
So I'm going to introduce you to somebody who can introduce you to Les.
Really?
Yeah.
That would be incredible because he is just like, man, when I'm feeling down and I'm like, oh, I don't know, King, I don't know if I can do it. I turn him on. My grandfather actually sent me one of his videos this morning, who has originally turned me on to him.
Yeah.
And it's motivating. And I think in my book, I talk about that reset. And sometimes it's easy to reset, and sometimes it's hard. It takes a
Yeah.
long time. But being able to shorten that period to put the past, put things that you think aren't going to work out behind you and reset for the future moment, is so important. And everyone gets that a different way. But for me, hearing other people tell me about their journeys always helps me do that. And Les is one who definitely does that.
Yeah, he has a great story to tell as well.
Oh, amazing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Akeem, for being with us. I'm fired up now. I got to go run around the block and like.
Me too. I've been ready to take my little pup outside and take her on a long walk.
Awesome. So thank you, Akeem. Thank you, listener, for listening. I don't know. You've got to know 25 people right off the bat that you can send this link to, because Akeem's cool. He's got a lot of stuff to share. He's awesome. He's motivational. He's got the mindset. He's got the persistence, the whole package. So forward this episode to them. We will both thank you, and your friends will thank you too. And then be sure to be here with us next week.